Good morning, everyone. This is Richard Solomon. The show is Taking Care of Business, and we're here on a beautiful day, and we're here to give you some great information. There isn't a week that doesn't go by in which somebody gives my law firm a call about a matter involving a traffic incident, either an accident, and we had a show with Rick Weisbeck from the Lipsitz Green Law Firm on that, or on some kind of traffic encounter with the police, speeding, stop sign, red light cameras, DWI, definitely speeding, especially here down in the New York metropolitan area. There's just tons of enforcement, especially on the bridges, especially late at night. So today, to help everybody out there sort of understand their rights and the dynamics of pullovers and traffic incidents, I have with me an incredible criminal lawyer. His name is Barry Covert. I've actually known him for almost a quarter of a century. He's an incredible lawyer. In fact, in many ways, he's my go-to guy when there's a sticky situation that's presented to me and it's a little bit beyond my level of expertise. So Barry's sort of my 411 or my 411 911 when it comes to matters of traffic situations in the law. Barry, welcome to Taking Care of Business. Thanks for taking time out from your busy day to be with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So in my opinion, and this is just my opinion here, I always thought that the defense of a traffic situation starts exactly when those red lights go on and you're instructed to pull over. Do you share that?
No doubt about it.
All right.
Absolutely.
So, from your experience, what would you advise people on how to conduct themselves and to present themselves? They've pulled over into a nice, safe place. They've signaled, of course, to show.
Yeah, I think that's the first key. Is when the first thing you want to do is let the officer feel safe. So and I say this by personal experience as well, but I tell this to everybody who asks me, which is as soon as you see those red lights behind you, and the officers will follow you a little while. Nowadays, they're putting your license plate number into their computers, and they're a little bit distracted while they're behind you, especially if it's not a high-speed chase or anything like that. And the first thing I want to do is try to set up a situation where the officer is as comfortable as possible. I'm looking for a spot off to the side of the road, way off, or if it doesn't look like I have to drive too far, to get right off the road into a little parking lot area. And that way the officer knows that they're going to be safe. I always cringe when I'm watching traffic and I see that a motorist has pulled off to the left when you're on a throughway, when it's 2 lanes or 3 lanes going in each direction, and they go to the center barrier. That's putting the officer in danger, and I've had a lot of officers tell me that they wrote tickets to that person and figured out as many charges as they could write up just because the person pulled off to the center median, putting the officer's life at risk because there's no place to pull off. So the first thing you want to do is pull off to the right at a location, not too far away, but if you can see a spot not too far away without making it look like you're trying to take off from the officer, that is nice and safe, or even a little parking lot area, pull off there. Now the officer knows when they're exiting their vehicle, they don't have to worry about traffic hitting them, because that happens all the time. We read about it in the papers,
and you see
it on TV.
Yeah.
And you want to start right off that way. And then you just want to continue in that mode. More people get out of traffic tickets. I get out of traffic tickets because I'm so cooperative with the officer all the way through. So I've got my documents ready, and if I don't have my documents, I just tell the officer, I don't think I put my latest insurance card in here, but I'm insured. Here's one of the old ones. If you got a question, I'll send it to you later. Just give them the documents. Be cooperative, knowing that's exactly what you said. That investigation has begun the moment he put his red lights on, and you now want to try to get him out of writing you up for tickets. His job is to find violations and write you up. You're trying to get him to not do that.
Or at least go just for one ticket as opposed to 3 or 4.
Absolutely, and I think that the nicer you are to them, the better chance you even have of catching a break. When an officer comes up to me, I just had a situation where I was driving back from New York City, 2 o'clock in the morning. I took my daughter to a show, driving back from New York City, and I got pulled over, and they rolled down my windows or pressed the button, and the officer said, "Do you know how fast? Did you see that? Did you see me over on the side of the road when you're going down the hill?" I said, "Yes, I did." "Do you know how fast you were going?" And that speed limit was 35. It was just changing going into a village. And I said, "You know what? When I saw you, I looked down at my speedometer. I'm sure I'd already slowed down. I was down to about high 40s, so I'll guess I was probably above 50. He said, "Yep, you were in the mid-50s." And I agreed with him. And he said, "You know, you got to watch the traffic." And I said, "Yep, you're right. I should have known that there was a sign back there. I didn't realize that there was one." And he let me go. He gave me a pass.
Wow.
Because I was just agreeable, just cooperative with him.
So as a lawyer, as opposed to a radio host, I have to ask you the question of, what about admitting things? I mean, isn't that kind of a two-edged sword? Because at least as a lawyer, I've seen many a ticket where the main evidence is your statement against your own, your own interest.
I think it really depends on what you think you're going to get written up on. At DWI, you don't want to give them any information. If you know you've been drinking, you don't want to even think about giving them any information. You don't want to tell them how many drinks you had, where you were. You want to be nice, cooperative, but do not give them any information that's going to come back to haunt you. If you're an over-the-road trucker and you've got safety violations, you don't want to admit any of those. But if you've got a low-level speed, I would err on the side of simply saying, yeah, I knew I was a few miles over the speed limit, and I've been let off many times because of that. If you've got a tail light out, but you're not a DWI candidate, then you may want to say, I just saw that tonight. I was going home now to get it repaired. I agree with you on anything above just a simple low-level ticket. You don't want to give them any additional information, because that is exactly what's going to come back and haunt you at a trial.
Now, when you say low-level ticket, what does that include? Is that stop signs? What does that include?
Yeah, stop sign. I don't even know if I'd give up the that I went through a rolling stop sign. I would only admit by and large to just I was over a few miles on the speed limit, because that's something that's fairly simple for them to try to prove. Although you and I have fought those charges successfully many times. But on a stop sign, no. On it, I wouldn't give them that. Certainly not on a red light. I mean, that's a hard charge for them to prove unless they've got a traffic cam. It's your word against the officer's word. You don't want to give them any admission on a red light or anything like that. Certainly not on a cell phone violation. As you and I know now, texting, using the cell phone, has the ante has been up so high that you don't want to acknowledge that you did that. So it really depends upon what exactly the officer's investigating you for.
In your opinion, does it matter whether there's one officer or two officers at the pullover as far as a dynamic in the situation?
Absolutely. I think that when there's two officers, there's double the chance that you are going to get written up for more tickets, that you are going to have a situation where usually it's a more experienced officer with a younger officer there as well, and the younger officer wants to impress the more experienced officer, or if the younger officer wants to give you a break, the more experienced officer is now being the hard guy saying, no, you got to write him up for this or that. I think that the dynamics on a one-on-one are much easier to control than the dynamics of a two-on-one. And as I say, I think it more than doubles. I think it exponentially increases your chances of getting written up on multiple violations, because now you have one officer talking to you while the other officer is looking around your vehicle, looking for any violations, looking if they see any marijuana in the vehicle, any weapons in the vehicle, if there's any problems with your vehicle that they can write you up for. So I think that two officers is much more problematic by and large.
Now, what's interesting is sometimes, in Suffolk County, you actually see a single police officer and then a backup officer comes as well. And I've always found that to be interesting, that there's two vehicles and two police officers.
And that's a real problem. And that really, you would hope that they only do that when they suspect that there's something more serious than just a simple violation, such as a speed or something like that, because it really worries you that there's now four officers being tied up in these times of budgetary constraints with one simple traffic ticket. But yeah, when there's another vehicle, again, I think that the more officers you have at the scene, the better chances. It's just human nature that one of them is just going to be a hard guy about this and insist that you be written up, or that somebody's going to try to impress somebody else, or you have four sets of eyes looking at your vehicle trying to figure out if there's some violation with your vehicle that it's not in proper working order. So, you know, that's a more problematic situation. I'm much more comfortable with a one-on-one.
The one thing I've always noticed is that the more officers there are, the more likely one is always got his hand ready on his holster, and I've just seen that 100 times, just driving
Absolutely.
around. In terms of,
And I got good advice from a former U.S. attorney guy. He's now a former U.S. attorney. He used to be a former DA as well, and he gave me good advice. He said, when they approach your vehicle, put your hands up on the top of the steering wheel. Have your driver's license up on the dashboard. Put your hands up on the vehicle as they're on the steering wheel as they're approaching. Again, you're trying to make them more and more comfortable. Now, when you have multiple officers, same thing. You got one with their hand on the gun. Again, you're trying to make them more comfortable. Don't give them any information unless you think you can talk your way out of the speeding ticket, and sometimes you can, especially if it's a low-level speeding ticket. Don't give them any additional information than they need, than you have to give them, that is, anything that they can use against you, but try to make them comfortable.
in terms of paperwork, what is the traditional set of paperwork? I know they always say license and registration, but what should you give them?
Well, you certainly give them your driver's license. They're entitled to your identification. And they traditionally will ask you for your registration and for your insurance card. I've been pulled over many times without the registration and or insurance card, or at least without the updated ones, because we lawyers have enough paperwork and we forget to do our own. And so I didn't ever brought it out to the car. So they'll traditionally ask you for the registration and insurance card. Now, your registration they can figure out very quickly from running your driver's license, and also from the sticker on the front windshield. So they can figure that out pretty readily. The insurance card, it could be a little more problematic if you don't have it. I haven't run into big problems with it. But I suspect that because I have a currently registered vehicle and I look like a professional, I probably get a pass on that. But they do ask for those documents, and obviously, as you and I know, Richard, the problem that you have with not having an insured vehicle is a huge problem, and the fines you pay and or the suspension you face with the DMV is a huge problem if you don't have an insured vehicle. So you do want to make sure you pay attention to that.
Now, one thing for the people out there who are listening, there's a very big difference between having an insurance card and actually having insurance, because you could get insurance, you can cancel it the next day, that card still exists, but the actual insurance and the insurance policy is no longer valid. So sometimes, at least I've seen in the local courts, when you bring in your insurance card, they say, no, we need to see a letter from your insurance broker or a letter from your insurance carrier that says that, on the date of the pullover, that you were fully insured, it was all active. So that's an important thing to note.
That's an important document that you're going to have. As you say, that the insurance card, the insurance companies kind of do people a disservice, because you sign up for insurance or you re-up your insurance and they give you your insurance card before you even pay for that entire next term. They give you the card as though you did. And then people who fall behind, if they just choose to make payments or don't make the payment at all, get their insurance terminated. And you may not even realize that because you changed addresses and didn't get the notification that you fell behind on your insurance payments, and therefore your insurance was expired. Well, as you're describing, there is no real sympathy there from the courts. They don't want to look at your card because they know that card was an anticipatory card saying that you had insurance in the future that you may not have paid for. They want to see the letter to make sure that you paid and that you actually had insurance in place on the day you were pulled over, and there has been very little forgiveness on that.
All right. Well, speaking of forgiveness, you'll have to forgive us for taking a quick break. This is Richard Solomon. The show is Taking Care of Business. Super attorney Barry Covert of the Lipsitz Green Schmade Cambria Law Firm up in Buffalo, New York, and offices around the state, 1-800-870-8138. is with us. We'll be right back. Keep it locked here. All right, it's Richard Solomon. The show is Taking Care of Business, tcbradio.com on the web and on YouTube. If you go into the YouTube search box and type in TCB Radio, WCWP, all one word, you'll find us. We have a whole channel with a lot of great content up there. Today's content, if you're just joining us, is we're talking about motor vehicle situations with the attorney that I go to for those kinds of situations. That's Barry Covert at the Lipsitz Green, Chemay, Cambria law firm up in Buffalo and offices around the state of New York. 800-870-8138. When there are situations where a client presents me with a situation and it's one of those things where I'm like, not really sure what to do, because there's a lot of rules out there. There's this thing called the driver responsibility assessment and all these questions that may arise in very particular situations. Barry Covert is the attorney that I seek out first. You see sort of my, as I said in the first segment, my 411 and 911 kind of guy, especially when the person's calling me from their cell phone at the pullover. so, because we get that too. In fact, the first thing I always say is just make sure that, make the call quick, because the cops are not really happy when you're on the phone making all kinds of calls.
And that's the best advice you can give right there. Is there's a lot of good pieces of advice. One is we talked about in the first segment, how to act when you know you're getting pulled over, and how to try to make the police officer comfortable and get the best possible scenario for having minimal number of tickets, or maybe even none if it's Christmas Day. It's also important to know, and I know we're going to talk about that later in this segment, how to set yourself up to hopefully not get pulled over. But the first thing once you get pulled over is call an attorney. Call an attorney immediately. And certainly when it comes to DWIs, do not take the breath test without calling a lawyer, and make sure you get referred. Even if you call your family lawyer, make sure that family lawyer then immediately puts you in touch with a lawyer that has expertise on DWIs, because as you and I know, Richard, it's so complicated to determine whether somebody should take the test or not. And it's not black and white. It's very much voodoo and magic, and knowing what all the regulations are, and then you as a lawyer trying to make a determination based upon how your client sounds, based upon whether or not they have prior criminal DWI arrests, based upon whether there's an accident involved, and then trying to make the best possible decision as to whether to have them take the test or refuse, because we know that the refusal in and of itself is a one-year revocation, which could alter people's professional lives if they rely upon their licenses. So call that lawyer immediately.
Yeah. Now, I believe your law firm actually has a app.
Absolutely.
That for the Android iPhone app that
Correct.
Figures out where you are on a GPS, and it kind of signals like, I'm in trouble, help me. So that's kind of a very cool feature.
And it sends a message right to us as the lawyers in the criminal department, because we have 6 lawyers, and all 6 of us are very well trained on DWIs. And it will immediately send us a message that somebody is seeking help. It will give you our phone numbers, but it'll also try to give us your contact information if you enter it in the appropriate way. And then we can immediately communicate with you to try to help you right there on the spot. And I cannot really explain the difference in outcomes between when somebody calls a lawyer early on, or when someone waits until the next morning after they've already been arrested, they've already taken the test or declined, and then they explain to us the next morning what happened, and they say, did we do the right thing? And I never want to crush them. The decision's been made, that the water's under the bridge, but it's usually not the right decision. So you really do need to try to call a lawyer right away.
And not just anybody. Call a lawyer, but then ask the lawyer to get you like a DWI guy, because, like, for example, my brother's a great lawyer, but he's a real estate guy. That's what he principally focuses on. So, and he's a co-host on the show. But
Absolutely.
And to be honest, even though I do a lot of truck regulation tickets and some regular garden variety DMV type stuff, I've never done a DWI case. I've been asked a little bit, and I've done the arraignments, and I've actually come to court, and I'll say something to the effect of, Judge, I'm only here for the arraignment. Other counsel who's much more experienced in this field will be hired, but I just wanted to have somebody here so that the client wasn't unrepresented.
And that's because you are wise enough, as am I, to not pretend that we're experts in areas that we're not experts in. And as soon as I hit areas that I'm not an expert in, which there are many, we have 50 lawyers in our firm, and many of them in areas that I don't know anything about, we send them right over to that person. You want a lawyer, as you're saying, that knows the area of DWIs, that can properly advise you, and there's so much fluidity in the DWI's laws, as there are in other areas of vehicle and traffic law, such as the change in points and penalties for texting, and the changes in points and penalties for speeding over time, and the assessments that you have to deal with all the time, and the court surcharges that are ever increasing in a way that New York State's raising tax money. So you really, whatever area you're talking about of law and of criminal law, you do want an expert in that particular area. A great DWI lawyer doesn't necessarily have any expertise in homicide cases. A great homicide attorney doesn't necessarily have any expertise in DWI law. So you really want to make sure that you're referred to the right lawyer.
I'll give you an example. I did get a call about a recent DWI situation, and I said, look, I don't know anything, but if you want me just to handle the arraignment, just come in and say not guilty so that the particular person won't be held in custody or tied up. Because I know that if you have an attorney, they process you a little bit faster than if you are, I don't know, maybe they have to get like legal aid or whatever. In some places, in some counties, it's not as readily available. And I was ready to go up and do the quick arraignment, but they ended up using somebody who was very, very local and looked very, very experienced. And I noticed that even just in a very subtle thing, like when they were talking about the automatic revocation of the license, the particular attorney who was handling the matter said, well, wait a second, this guy uses his license, professionally. You are innocent until proven guilty, blah, 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 blah. And that was enough. That was enough to have kept the license temporarily. Yet, had I gone, I would have I don't know what I would have done. I probably would have argued maybe like, well, isn't that a little premature? But the way they did it was just so much more effective and based on a lot of experience. Plus,
what you're just, go ahead.
But not only that, if you're in the system, they kind of know you. Like certain places, like the commercial divisions of certain courts know me. They tend to know a lawyer almost like a brand. Oh, Rich Solomon, yeah, he has these kind of cases. Or, yeah, he has
Absolutely.
He has very good paper. He writes very good paper. Or, oh, yeah, like Jack Collins at your law firm. He's like one of the best appellate guys I've ever met. So whenever you see something that Jack writes, you go, oh, he's got great paper. He always has great paper.
And the courts, as you're saying, and the courts treat you that way too. So when Jack walks into court, he gets the benefit of the doubt. He gets the benefit of the court knowing that he is a credible litigant in front of them, and that when he says black is black and white is white, they believe him, as opposed to someone who has not appeared in front of them or not often. And so when what you're describing in the DWI case is also correct. If I walk in, the local judges know that I teach them over the years on DWI laws and their continuing judicial education. They know I appear in front of them all the time. When they ask me, what am I supposed to take his license today? And I say, no, you can hold off and complete the arraignment on another day. They understand that I would not misrepresent that to them. So they will hold off on taking a license. And then what you're describing that you saw this other lawyer do was obtain at least a hardship license for his client, because the client is a professional. And it's not easy to obtain the initial hardship license. New York State purposely made that difficult. So some courts require that you put your request in writing. Technically, that should be what they require, but some don't. But the local lawyers will know which judges require it, which judges do not, and they will show up with the right paperwork when they need to. So these are very complicated areas that do require people that have the expertise to handle them.
So what are the things that people should think about that would be drawing attention? My accountant has a great expression which is, we'll talk about a tax situation either for a client or a business or whatever. And I'll say, well, why don't we try this? And then they'll say, why don't we just go get a big red flag and run it right up the building? So I'll say,
I say that to my criminal clients all the time too. Why are you drawing attention to yourself?
What are the things that people really need to think about before they put the key in? And I guess now with the new cars, before they push the button that starts the car, if they have one of the fancy new cars.
Obviously, you don't want to drink and drive. And so the biggest target you're going to put on your back as a driver is to drink and drive, because the penalties are so dire now. You lose your license if you're a professional. You could really impact your profession and your career. So you really want to think about drinking and driving. I tell all the young lawyers I tell all the college students I can, that when I know I'm going to a hockey game that I may have more than 2 drinks over 4 hours, I tuck away. I live a good distance from downtown, but I tuck another $75 into my wallet, and if I'm going to have that extra drink, I take a cab home. And that doesn't happen often, but then you don't have to count your drinks. You don't have to be overly careful. And I've been gone home many times, and my wife has said, why'd you even take a cab? You didn't have too much to drink. I said, I don't even want to worry about it. In today's day and age, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, all these organizations have done a wonderful job of making the penalties prohibitive. And we should all take note and make sure that we're not drinking and driving. After that, you want to make sure your vehicle looks clean. It doesn't have tinted windows. Those are obviously going to be something that's going to get the officers a little bit aggravated. You want to make sure that things aren't hanging from the vehicles. Like sometimes there's marijuana paraphernalia that people will hang from their rear view mirrors, which obviously makes you an immediate target. You want to have your vehicle look good. If it looks like a moving traffic violation, they're going to treat it like it's a moving traffic violation. The more rust you have on your vehicle, sad to say, but the better chance you're going to get pulled over. We can't ignore the elephant in the room. If you're driving while black, you're better chance you're going to get pulled over. That is the reality. So you really want to make sure that you're in a vehicle that doesn't stir a lot of attention. It's sad that we have to acknowledge that, but there's really no doubt that we do. You want to watch your driving. You certainly don't want to be on a cell phone anymore. You don't want to be talking without a hands-free unit, or you don't want to be texting. There was just a recent report that the troopers throughout the state have now increased the use of big SUVs so that they have a higher level of perspective. They're higher up and they can look down through your windows and have a better chance of seeing whether you're texting or not. So there are just a lot of obvious common sense steps you want to take to make sure that you don't get yourself in their crosshairs. Consider it a conversation you're having with your child, even if you're not having that conversation with your child. What would you tell a teenager that's 16 or 17 years old to do and not do to make sure that they don't get the attention of the authorities? And those are good common sense measures to take. You don't want to stick out. As you said, your accountant says, I tell the same thing to my white-collar clients. Why are you driving a Lamborghini if you only have a business that you are reporting $60,000 to $70,000 a year income on? It does not make sense that you're driving these wonderful vehicles and you've got this castle of a home. Same thing in a vehicle. Why are you driving 80 miles an hour in a 65? You want to go 3, 4, 5 miles over? The officers usually are not going to pull you over for that unless they see something else. So when I hit my cruise control and I'm driving a nice long distance and the traffic speed limit is 65, I set it at 69, 70. Never more than 6 miles an hour over the speed limit, because now you're going to get a chance that you're going to get pulled in, especially your cruise control is not perfect and the vehicles aren't regulated perfectly as to their speed. So the officer's calibration device in his test may be different than, and his radar might be different than what you set in your vehicle, or you think you set. So you want to do all of the obvious things that just do not put you on their radar screen.
Well, the other things I guess I would add is the following. You don't want to be blasting loud music. You
Yes.
don't want to be necessarily young in a fancy car.
Because you blast loud music, I want to pull you over at that point because I'm annoyed at you.
You don't want to necessarily be young and be driving sort of a red sports car. I don't understand
Yes.
why a lot of young people want to be driving all these fancy cars, because I'm always saying to them, police officers are not exactly happy with very young people who have vehicles that were probably bought for them by their parents, and they're driving around. And sometimes there's 4 young people in a car or 5, and they're going fast. That's always that's always
And
like a
and,
draw.
and what you're saying, even in any vehicle, is I agree with that absolutely. And even if it's not a great vehicle, the more young people you have in it, the more likely, I believe, based upon anecdotal evidence, that they are going to be pulled over because the officers are just going to believe that they're doing something inappropriate. Now, the old advice, nothing good happens after midnight, is also true in a vehicle.
Oh yeah.
When you are out after midnight, there are very few vehicles on the road. We talked in the first segment about my drive back from New York City, and I was pulled over somewhere between 2 and 2:30. Well, by 12:30, I absolutely realized that by and large, and I was on a long trip, by and large, I was usually the only vehicle on the road. A bored officer is just going to figure out he's going to pull me over for the heck of it. Nothing good happens after midnight. You are so much more likely to get pulled over. And as we all know, you're probably more likely to have a couple drinks in you as well, and that's a bad combination. So you really want to watch yourself, and that old advice of just going home is very good.
And not only that, but also late at night, the other problem is fatigue, and no one really talks about it, because it's not illegal to be tired, but you can kind of be negligent if you're tired, and you're not drinking coffee or taking breaks or keeping the windows open, and that's like another issue. By the way, for the people out there, even though we talk about DWI and alcohol, we're not forgetting that any drug abuse, whether prescription drugs, which are legal, or illegal drugs, can have some very brutal and serious consequences. I remember a case that I had where it was a young guy. He was on Hempstead Turnpike. He was in a bar. He must have drove 100 feet out of the bar. It was very late at night. They pulled him over immediately. They hit him with a DWI charge. They found marijuana in the car somewhere. I don't know how they had access to it, but they did. And that was just the beginning of the woe.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you said that, because I have seen a real increase in the drug-related charges on pullovers where they see drugs. We've always had for many decades, obviously, marijuana, which just kills me that people have a roach of marijuana in their ashtray, or that they have marijuana lying around. But what I've also seen much more recently is a normal traffic stop, a routine stop, but they see pills lying around, and they inquire as to whether those pills are legal or not. And as you and I know, there's also a requirement that any prescription pills be in a bottle that identifies what the pills are. So just the fact that prescription pills are lying around, not in a bottle, is in and of itself an offense. And I have handled multiple charges now where the officers see a pill, which is incredible to me, because I don't know how they do a field test on the spot. And as you and I know, I'm being facetious, they don't. They just assume that this pill is something illegal, and they write it up, and it's sort of disprove it in court, but they get you into the courtroom, and it's very inconvenient. And at that point, you got to hire a lawyer, and then I've got to fight it and tell the DA that the officer didn't have probable cause. He couldn't just say by looking at the pill what it was. But you're getting into a very bad situation. So you definitely want to watch what you have lying around in your vehicle and what you're under the influence of.
All right, this is Richard Solomon. My guest is Barry Covert. That was part 2 We need to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Barry Covert is with the law firm of Lipsitz Green, Chimay, Cambria up in Buffalo, 800-870-8138, but they have offices all over the state. And believe me, I've definitely referred a lot of very important clients to them. We'll be right back. We're talking about motor vehicles today and motor vehicles in the law. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Richard Solomon, your host on Taking Care of Business, tcbradio.com, on YouTube, TCB Radio WCWP. If you do a little bit of search on the search engine inside YouTube, we have a pile of really good audio up there, and we have all kinds of great guests, and we have all kinds of great future guests coming up. Today, we are talking about motor vehicle situations and the law. And I've been gracious enough to had Barry Covert from the law firm of Lipsitz Green spend some time with us talking about a lot of the dynamics of pullovers, protocols, paperwork, what gets you into trouble. If you missed any of that material, check us out. We always have ways of getting copies of the shows out there, putting it up on YouTube and the like. And then maybe we'll even get this up at the lglaw.com website if we can. In any event, so let's go back. This show goes very, very quickly. Oh, by the way, if you ever need Barry or any of the different members of his criminal law team, 800-870-8138. They definitely are the people to talk to in various aspects, because the truth is we all drive. You know, we kind of live in a society where not driving is a huge economic and lifestyle problem. You know, as much as the government tries to push mass transit, it's not a great alternative. It's not necessarily convenient. And all of us really do need our vehicles. And the last thing you want is your vehicle seized in a DWI. We didn't even talk about that. Maybe we should for 1 second. Or to have your license revoked. Let's just talk real fast, because we did talk a little bit about DWI before. Downstate, down here, they're happy to seize your vehicle. I had a case where I represented a limo company. And what was interesting about that case is the rogue driver decided on his own to take the limo out at 4 a.m. in a part of New York State. And he was pulled over and they seized the vehicle. Now, I wasn't there to represent the driver. I was there to represent the company. And I had to go to the seizure hearing. And the first thing I said is, wasn't supposed to do this. We fired his tushy, and whatever you do with it was fine by us. He's not going to work for us ever again, because now we're on notice that he has some kind of problem. But the vehicle is an $85,000 limousine, and we shouldn't have to pay the price since we've had no notice of that. We did get the vehicle back, but there was a stern warning that says, any problem, again, we're keeping the vehicle. It's always bothered me as a policy that the people who are enforcing the laws get to take the vehicle and liquidate it and keep the money, which is
that seems to be a due process violation. Seems to be inappropriate on many different levels. But we do know in this day and age, you got two factors coming to a head here. One is the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which they've done a wonderful job educating the public as to the dangers of drunk driving. But in some instances, I think that the policies do go too far, and this is certainly one of them, where a vehicle is being forfeited. And the other is the need for municipalities to collect money. And forfeiture is another avenue for them to do that. So even in an area that was never traditionally lending itself to forfeiture, now they're using it as another way to raise money. And as you and I see, they use the entire court process now to raise money. There's state surcharges, mandatory charges on every ticket that you are found guilty of or plead guilty to. Then there's the court fines on top of that. Then you have the driver's assessments. You just have money coming in, and if you have to take the Safe Driver program, you have the fees for that. Now you have the forfeitures of the vehicles for DWIs. You know, everything is a money-making process here, because they need the money for the state and for the municipalities, and this is one of the areas that they're trying to furtively pick.
And not only that, but the money is clean money. When you deduct something like a business expense, you buy a piece of equipment for your business, you get to deduct it. You pay for a lawyer, you get to deduct it. but fines, criminal fines, are not deductible. So the government gets 100 cents on the dollar, whereas if you pay just like say a license fee, or like say with your truck, the license, the tags, the insurance, all that's deductible, but the $8,000 fine that they assess against you for being overweight over so many thousand pounds, that is a clean shot of money for them. The one question
Absolutely.
I have for you as a lawyer is, isn't there an equal protection problem? I'm driving a Yugo. They don't make those anymore, so let's use that. I'm driving a Yugo. It's 25 years old, and you can't get parts for it. And sadly, I'm DWI. They forfeit that. The car's worth $4, on a good day. On the other hand, somebody else is driving a state-of-the-art, super expensive, highest-end kind of car there is. Isn't there a sort of an equal protection problem in the sense that the guy with the better car is being punished much more harshly than the guy like me with the Yugo?
I absolutely agree with you, and what we are into is an area of the law, though, that usually does not get challenged because a guy with a more expensive vehicle will come to me and say, isn't there a real problem here with this due process violation? And then when I lay out for him the cost of challenging this and how far he has to take it, unless you can find a group that's going to finance that to challenge it, it's prohibitively expensive, and usually it's not worth it. Usually you can do what you did for your limo driver and their people, which is work something out with a stern warning, or even traditionally in forfeiture cases, especially when there's no prior record, they'll let you buy the vehicle out or buy the item out at a lower value. And so it's maybe give us $5,000 and you can have your BMW back. And so it's cost prohibitive to challenge that, but absolutely I agree with that. That there's many equal protection violations, there are due process violations, and I think that there's some very valid challenges to that. But the problem again is that it's cost prohibitive to engage in the litigation.
What I wonder about sort of is this situation. You're leasing a car or you're renting a car. What happens there, especially if it's forfeited? How does that work? Because people don't necessarily know.
Yeah, I don't think I think that's going to be an area similar to your limo driver, where there was a different entity that owns the vehicle, and therefore the courts are a little more sympathetic. I think that if you have a situation where you have Avis or one of these rental car companies, I have not had to address that situation, but I would suspect that where there's no prior knowledge to that company that the person who rented the vehicle had any priors, I suspect that they would have great sympathy with the courts. But if they rented it to a person who had a prior record that they should have been aware of, that could be a very, very different situation.
Well, I know at leasing doesn't necessarily protect you from seizure because they can always give your car back to the finance company, and then you still have to pay the lease payments.
Correct.
Nonetheless. So that's a big problem.
Yep.
So what are the different kinds of courts that you can end up in based upon all of these different kinds of potential violations?
Well, you have the town and village courts that you could be charged in. You have in the four major cities in New York, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and New York City, you have the traffic violations bureaus that you can show up in. And downstate by you guys, you also have the district courts that you can show up in when it comes to, depending on what you're charged with, ranging from traffic tickets, parking tickets, speeding tickets, traffic violations up to DWIs, because driving while intoxicated is a misdemeanor, or driving under the influence of drugs. So you can show up in one of these various courts, and as you and I know, one of the hardest courts to deal with is the traffic violations bureaus in larger cities, because those do not lend themselves to plea negotiations, which you see outside of the four major cities. And plea negotiations are a wonderful way to try to reduce normal traffic tickets to non-moving violations or perhaps parking tickets. And instead you're dealing with an administrative judge now. And it is very much, I hope hope they're not listening to the show, but it's a kangaroo court.
Oh,
that
it's
you're
totally a
dealing with
kangaroo
there.
court. I'll never forget this. I was in Staten Island, and Staten Island is notorious for having the most convictions. And I was looking this up on the internet. I know the internet is the source of all truth, but the statistics were something like Staten Island had the highest conviction rate in the 5 boroughs of New York, or the 5 counties of New York. And not only that, but they had the highest level of convictions even when police officers weren't present to prosecute the tickets.
Absolutely.
And I'm amazed when you go to these hearings and they'll, on the face of the ticket, we also have the Environmental Control Board, which is also, they call them OATH, the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings in New York City. And it's the same thing. You're in front of an administrative judge, and the person who is deciding the case is paid for by the people who are obtaining the revenue that is coming out of your hide. And I always thought that was a little bit of a problem.
I think it's a huge conflict, a huge problem.
And I was in Staten Island. I was on a ticket for a particular construction company because I do a lot of truck regulation stuff, and this was on a piece of construction equipment. And I was number 57. And there I am, number 57, and it was amazing. People came with pictures, maps, and the explanations, and every single person was found guilty. Every single person. I'll never forget, there was a woman who was representing herself. She did a great job, and she said the following, and I thought she testified honestly. She said, "Judge, I'm on the Staten Island Expressway every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The traffic is incredibly slow. It is always heavy. For the police to say that I was going 80 miles an hour is an impossibility. You can't go 80 miles an hour. If you were having a heart attack and you needed to get to a hospital, you would die on the way." And the guy just looked at her, banged the gavel, guilty, and suspended her license on the spot. And there I am sitting in the audience, and I really wanted to jump up. I got to say this, I wanted to say, "You've got to be kidding me!" I was like, I was just like, I've been on the Staten Island Expressway going towards like the Verrazano Narrow Bridge, one way or the other, or the Staten Island Expressway, or going to the Goethals Bridge, and I am amazed how slow the traffic is, and with the construction, and I'm like, and yet, they didn't even say like, is it possible maybe you're going 50 or 60 or something like that? No break, no nothing. Just, in fact, there's a well-known judge. I won't mention his name, but there's a well-known judge who's got the highest conviction rate. I actually asked that he be recused. I'll never forget this. I did a trial. You'll be proud of this. I don't recommend this. This is like one of those things where, a professional driver or closed track, do not attempt this. but what happened was I actually asked for the case to be transferred to criminal court, and of course they said no. I said equal protection, because I said if I went to criminal court, I'll get a better deal than here. Here you're going to find us guilty no matter what, because that's the way this court is. Yet if I go to Targhee Street, I'll either get
well, first of all, by transferring to criminal court, you've gone to a different level standard of review for whether a client is guilty of beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
Instead of clear and convincing in the traffic court.
Right.
So absolutely.
So, but they said no, and I still think there should be a way to do that. But we'll have to talk about that. As
I
lawyers.
agree, and one of the problems you have here is you have the judges, and we have some local ones that I really respect that do a great job. But the same officers traditionally appear in front of these judges. It's usually the same officers that traditionally will write up the traffic tickets, the speeding tickets, and for years and years they're appearing in front of these judges. But they have you as a defendant in front of them, especially if you don't have a lawyer. As a defendant, you're there once, or maybe once every 5 years. Well, the judge doesn't have to look at you again after they find you to be not credible. So he has to look at the officer, though, who's probably got multiple cases that morning and probably comes back once a week or once every 2 weeks with multiple cases in front of the judge. And for the judge then to rule that you, as a defendant, are credible and that the officer is essentially not telling the truth is very difficult for that judge, because the judge is going to look at that officer again in the future, or maybe later that morning. And so I think it's a very unfair scenario that we are now subjecting our citizens to, and especially with the lower standard of proof than you have in the town and villages that you would appear at if you weren't in a large city, which in and of itself should be an equal protection violation. Why is it that if I allegedly speed in New York City, it's a lower standard for them to find me guilty than if I allegedly speed in a town or village just outside of New York City? And it's a real problem for people.
Oh, yeah. So let me just finish because believe it or not, we only have like 2 minutes left. And I want to get this in because I'm going to have you back for another an episode here on taking care of business. But so I said to the judge, I said, Judge, I want you to recuse yourself. And he kind of like looks at me and he goes, on what grounds? I said, well, remember that case 5 cases back? The motorist gave an incredible story of in his defense, and you didn't listen to him. All you did was you talked to your clerk and ignored everything he said, and then you rubber-stamped the police officer's testimony. That's a denial of due process. You don't believe in due process, and I don't want to have a denial of due process in my case because there's too much at stake here. And I said,
that's awesome.
And not only that, and I said, look, I'll Article 78 this, believe me. And what was interesting is he kind of backflowed a little bit, and he gave us much less of a fine than I thought he would have. And he said, your record isn't that bad. And I could have sworn I lost a bunch of these for the same client. But it was one of those things where I really called him to the mat. Now, it's hard for the public to be brave like that. The situation
and to follow it up.
Yeah.
Because they first of all, the public doesn't know to say these things. You're a lawyer, and you're well experienced, and you're wonderful to have as a lawyer representing somebody in front of them, but the public doesn't know this. And the public, the judge knows the public can't really follow up with the Article 78. So again, as we discussed previously in the forfeiture litigation, most people are not going to be able to get a lawyer and have them represent them to challenge this conviction on the low probability that any court, that the higher court is going to care anyway. And so the judges know this. And so you have very few situations where they've ever been overturned. And it lends itself to a very unfair scenario.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So believe it or not, we have to have you back. So the good thing about what we do on the radio is that we're going to have you back. So let's just give some contact information. You listen to an incredible hour of experience in motor vehicle situations, covering everything from speeding tickets to DWI to pullover dynamics protocols and the politics of sort of the police encounter with the motorists. We will cover in our next show all the things that we didn't get to cover in this show. So in case you want to talk to Barry, it's Barry Covert. He's at the law firm of Lipsitz Green, 1-800-870-8138. Do you have an email that you'd like to, lglaw.com?
B Covert, as in Barry Covert, BCOVERT, at LGLaw, as in LipsitzGreenLaw.com.
There you go. So in the last 15 seconds of the show, all I can say is to everyone out there, be careful driving. Your license is
important. Be safe for the holidays.
Yeah, be safe for every holiday, and be safe all the time because your life and the life of other people depend on it. We'll be back next week. See you soon. All right, greetings, everybody. This is Richard Solomon. We had such a phenomenal interview with attorney Barry Covert last week that we asked him to put aside his very, very busy criminal court calendar and rejoin us. So Barry Covert from the Lipsitz Green Law Firm, who is my go-to guy for matters of motor vehicle when they're really above my level of knowledge. He's with us today again, and I'm so happy to have him. We're going to pick up where we left off last time. If you missed anything at all, check us out. The content is going to definitely be up on YouTube. We'll probably have it in other places. We'll probably maybe put this on tcbradio.com as well, and probably at the lglaw.com law firm. So
absolutely.
Where we were talking, and I don't want to really repeat anything because the show just flies and there's so much to talk about. So what we were talking about when we ended the show last week is there's different kinds of courts. There's traffic violations bureau courts, and there's the local town and village courts, and then there's also the district courts. One thing I've noticed is that, do you notice that the village courts tend to have certain kinds of tickets, and the traffic violations bureaus tend to have other kinds of tickets that are more frequent.
Yes, absolutely. The traffic violations seem to have higher level tickets. You get the equipment violations all the time. You get the traffic devices, the failure to stop at a stop sign. In the town and village courts, at least around here, it's by and large speeding tickets. If you have inspection violations with over-the-road trucks and DWIs, and as we discussed in the prior segment, it's so much easier to resolve because what we didn't mention in the prior segment is that when you're in one of the four large cities in New York City, Rochester, Syracuse, or Buffalo, and you are automatically in front of the Traffic Violations Bureau, there is no ability to plea. There is no provision to do that. So when you're in the town and village courts where the tickets are usually a bit simpler, you have the ability to speak with the town or village prosecutor and try to get a reduction, come up with some type of a mutually agreed upon plea. Often in many of these courts, they want the money to stay local, so they have you plead to a local parking ticket for which New York State does not get to take a piece of that, or at least they've been fighting over who gets that. So it is very different to be in front of a town and village court as opposed to in front of one of the larger city traffic violation bureaus.
Oh, by the way, just for the people out there, in the last show we were talking about what are the nasty tickets, and one of the nasty tickets to get is a school bus ticket. That is a nasty ticket. Barry and I were talking in the last show about what were the problematic tickets. Obviously, DWI is always a problematic ticket because it's a political hot potato. I know that in the truck regulation world, a unsecured load is considered to be a felony, and they just have very zero tolerance on pleading those out or certain things like that. Another one is the school bus ticket. That's where you pass a school bus.
That's right.
And what's interesting is you'll see on a divided two-lane highway, sometimes the motorists on the other side will just fly by and they'll get pulled over. And then there's issues of, well, were you supposed to stop? It was really, such a wide highway, blah, blah, blah. By the way, what is the law on that? Is it both sides no matter what?
Both sides, no matter what.
Right.
So you're gonna have a real problem trying to get out of that ticket, as you described. That is a problem area and very low sympathy. Some of the nicest prosecutors I've dealt with, who are very deferential when it comes to speeding tickets, and will give your client the real benefit of the doubt, will tell you that they draw their line in the sand at school bus violations, passing a school bus, because you're creating such a danger to the children, and the prosecutors just will not give you a break on those charges. So you really have to be careful. I'm sure, like you, when I see a bus even slowing down and they got the yellow as opposed to the red lights on, I come to a stop good 100 feet away, 150 feet away, and I come to a dead stop. Out of respect for the children, but also knowing you don't even want to create a situation where you could be accused of passing the vehicle when it just changed to the red lights when it was stopping, but you didn't quite catch it. You don't want to put yourself in that situation.
I was on the road the other day, and I stopped just precisely like that, and I'm getting honked and honked and honked from the guy behind me, and I literally got out of my car and I said, "You're free to go in front of me and draw the multi-point ticket and the wrath of the police when you are caught for passing a school bus. By all means, I know
Absolutely.
You're in a rush, and I know it's very important, but I'm not going to risk it."
Absolutely, I'm with you. You feel free. You are a much better driver than me. Feel free to pass right by me and show me how it's done.
That's right. And don't ask for my business card because I can't represent you.
I can't. And one of the other problem areas now is texting on your phone. That's a real problem. They've increased the number of points that are associated with that. The courts are being warned and being asked to be serious on those charges. I walked into a court the other day, and when a judge who normally, prior to calling the traffic cases, addresses the audience and explains how the process works, he's very nice. He said, "But just to let you know that we have a policy in this court that we don't allow any reduction for texting while driving." And so that is now a real problem area. And normal speeding tickets, as you and I know, our problem area because of the cumulative effect. If you have so many speeds within 18 months, or so many points that accumulate on moving violations within certain periods of time, it becomes such a problem that it could lead to a suspension, increased fines, increased assessments. So these are all problem areas that you want to make sure you get a good lawyer to handle, because the cumulative effect can be almost as dire as the singular effect of a DWI.
So let me ask you a question. Sometimes you see the New York State Police on the roads. Sometimes you see county police on the road. Sometimes you see local police on the road. Sometimes you see the Port Authority. Now, the Port Authority even has like a highway unit, which kind of perplexes me. What are the different
You also see some of the SUNY schools on the police officers. I get these cases occasionally where it's State University of New York at Buffalo police officers on the road. The jurisdiction of New York State troopers is everywhere within the state of New York. County officers, it's everywhere within the county. But there's, as you know, there's also some laws that allow them to expand their jurisdiction as peace officers, even when they're outside of their exact area of employment. And then the town and village and city police officers, their jurisdiction is mainly in their municipalities, but again, as peace officers, they can go outside the municipality. It's very strange but for SUNY police, their jurisdiction is everywhere within the state. So I have cases where the SUNY police officers pull somebody over who is alleged to be speeding or under the influence many blocks away, or even half a mile or a mile away from the university campus. And you read their jurisdiction is everywhere within the state. So it's a very complex web of laws that deal with the jurisdiction of law enforcement, various law enforcement agencies.
Depending on the police officers, I guess, employment, whether it's New York State trooper or local, does that affect which court you end up in? Is it more offense related, or is it more who is pulling you over?
It's offense related. It's offense related because they have to prove that you were driving in that jurisdiction that you're appearing in. And so when you have a client who really pissed off the police officers, and you'll have speeding tickets from multiple municipalities, that's a great example that because you were speeding in one town after another, you can be charged within each one, and that trooper or that sheriff's deputy or even the police officer from one of the municipalities is allowed to continue to follow you and then writes you up for each jurisdiction, but they have to prove then that in each jurisdiction you were speeding, and they can then find you guilty of multiple offenses even though it's all part of one driving event. So it is very much where the offense occurred, in what jurisdiction, and that's an element of the offense to find you guilty, is that they can prove that you committed that offense in that jurisdiction.
So how do you wind up in TVB versus criminal court, say in New York or something else? How does that all work?
But based upon where you were charged. So if you're charged in one of the 5 or 4 major cities in New York, you're going to be in Traffic Violations Bureau, unless it's a misdemeanor offense. So if it's a reckless driving, that's a misdemeanor, then you will go to the criminal court, which you're better off at by and large, because it's beyond a reasonable doubt it's a legal standard.
I would much rather fight every single case in the criminal courts than any traffic violation. In fact, I would rather fight a jaywalking ticket in criminal court than a traffic violation.
Without a doubt. There's just no doubt about it. As we talked in last week's segment, the conviction rate in Traffic Violations Bureau is through the roof. They can't lose for ineptitude or incompetence. It doesn't matter. Or a failure of the police officer to even show up. They still get their conviction. So you want to be in the criminal court. But if you are a non-misdemeanor traffic violation within one of the four large cities in New York City, Buffalo, Syracuse, or Rochester, you will end up, unfortunately, in front of the Traffic Violations Bureau, where it's a lower standard, lower burden to convict you, no ability for any plea negotiations, and a judge who is going to be supervised by his superiors and judged based upon how much in fine amount is going to come in.
Let's talk a little bit about speeding tickets for a moment, because that's the big one. Is there a way for motorists to help lawyers defend a speeding ticket? I did this case in the Traffic Violations Bureau, and my cases tend to be very, very long. First thing I do is I move to dismiss the ticket, and then I argue. I just name something. I'll argue it. Ask for it to be transferred. Equal protection due process. Whatever. And ultimately what I end up doing is I have these very, very long trials. So one time I actually took out one of those, those self-help books on speeding. And I went through the entire outline of the book about how to question the officer. And the judge was like rolling her eyes. And I even said to her, and she even said, "What are you reading?" And I said, "I'm reading, the NOLO book on representing yourself in traffic court." And she started giving me a hard time. I said, "I thought I'm entitled to something other than taking it like the sheeple, having the police officer's testimony rubber stamped and then being found guilty and then sent off my way by way of the register." They actually get huffy if you actually defend yourself. It's sort of like...
Oh, there's no doubt about it. You're taking their time up. And the good judges are happy to have good lawyering in front of them, but many judges don't want you to take their time up. So if their day is going to be regulated and how busy they are that day based upon how many cases they call, and if every case goes quickly, they're done by 3 o'clock, but now you want to take 45 minutes to actually try the case, make arguments, present evidence, cross-examine the officer in a meaningful way, they're not getting any extra money for that.
Oh, no.
So now you're wasting their time.
That's why they don't really love me. In fact, one time during the long trial that I did, they had the stamp, and the stamp just says guilty, and then sometimes they just put not in front of it. But they stamped the tickets. So I said, "Judge, mistrial." I said, "You can't put that stamp down until you've decided the case." And the judge was like, "Yeah, but it's like, you put now." I said, No. You are just poised to write the fine because the state is hungry for the money and you're under pressure to do so, and you are denying us due process. I'm telling you, they don't really like me. The courts.
I'm getting that sense, but I also get the sense you don't care, and that's the way you have to be.
If you care, you're going to just go there and just take it and leave, and be found guilty. At least your clients want to feel like you're fighting for them,
Yeah, and absolutely. And if the judge is being fair, you can come up with arguments. So you started with the question of what can your client do? The first thing the client can do is not admit to the offense. Now, if they want to try to talk themselves out of a simple speeding ticket, as we discussed last week, I've had success, and I've tried to tell people how to have success in that. But other than a simple speeding ticket, anything more complicated, you don't want to admit that you were going through a red light. You don't want to admit that you were rolled a stop for a traffic ticket. You certainly had a DWI pullover. Don't want to admit to drinking and multiple beverages or where you were drinking. But what on a simple speed ticket, and what I really like is when my client immediately takes photographs of exactly where they were pulled over, and then goes back and either photographs or takes a videotape of the prior mile or so to see whether the actual signs were posted where they should have been, whether they were viewable, whether there was anything obstructing viewing the speed sign, what the pattern of the road is. That can be very, very helpful if they document that right away.
All right, let me hold that thought for 1 second. This show goes very quickly. Rich Solomon, Taking Care of Business. Keep it right here. We'll be right back. All right, Richard Solomon, Taking Care of Business. I am with superstar attorney Barry Covert. Yeah, we're not supposed to say that because of ethical rules, but I said that only in my capacity as a radio host. So there's the disclaimer. It's just an opinion. Anyway, Barry, we're talking about all kinds of motor vehicles. When we just finished the last segment of our second show together, we were talking sort of about clients going back to the scene in which they were pulled over, videotaping, photographing, kind of gathering the evidence. Could you continue with the whole process there about evidence gathering and getting ready for the trial?
Evidence gathering is very important, and as you and I know, the clients that get pulled over for speeding tickets or for going over the yellow center line, and not a DWI, they have a limited budget, and they're not going to have the money, by and large, for us to hire investigators or even to spend our own time going out there at our hourly fee to investigate it. So it's very helpful if they go back on a speeding ticket, for example, videotape the prior 1 mile to see if the signs were all where they should have been, because you and I can then, when we see where the signs were posted, see if that's lawful as to where they were posted, how often they should have been posted, if they should have been posted after each intersection. There are different rules and regulations that apply to that. Another great example is when they're charged with going over the center line in their driving, and not a DWI, but just going over the center line. They go back and they film that exact area that they were at, and you see that the lines are either non-existent or faded, or that there's potholes that explain why you have to go over the center line to avoid the potholes. So if they can go back, because they don't have the budget for us to do so, if they can go back and take photographs of the area, and that helps them to explain to me and helps me to present to the court why, in fact, they're not guilty of the offense, and we can come up with technical reasons as to why they should not be found guilty of, say, speeding or going over the center line or going over the fog line to the right. And that's the physical evidence is wonderful, and it really sets you apart from the other cases that a judge is going to hear that day, especially in traffic violations court, because when you have a nice presentation like that, that usually makes it an unusual case, and hopefully, even though everything's skewed against you in traffic violations court, hopefully a judge is going to take note and find your client not guilty.
Well, one thing that I'll recommend to everybody out there is I always ask ahead of time that the police officer speak slowly and clearly, because a lot of times what happens is you get this. Yeah, my name is Officer Johns. I was running the 54th precinct, marked vehicle, blah, blah, doing the 7 a.m. shift, and blah, blah, blah. And I was doing the eastbound BQE. The road was clear, this and that. And they have this whole prepared speech that they memorized for every case. It's the same thing over and over again. And they just rush through it. And I always say, could you please speak slowly? I would like to take notes, because if you notice, sometimes what will happen is they'll be very inconsistent in their speech. One time a police officer said she was on the northwest corner, then she said she was in the northeast corner. So I actually moved to dismiss on the grounds that her testimony was self-conflicting, and that she couldn't, as a matter of law, convict on clear and convincing, since she wasn't sure where she really was and had no photographic proof of it. Of course, they rubber stamped the cop anyway, and I had to appeal it. And that whole thing, because and be prepared that you may have to appeal things, even though they tell you appeals are expensive. It may be worth it for you as the motorist to do the appeal on your own, if enough is at stake. But
another thing I see with these officers is, especially when they see that there's a lawyer on the other side, they get nervous and they start reading from their report, and you have to object and say that this is all being read from the document. It's not the officer's recollection. It's not his memory as to what occurred. And then they start really fumbling and getting nervous, especially if the judge indicates to the officer that they cannot initially read from their report. They have to use it later to refresh their memory, and it's very difficult for citizens to do this without a lawyer. But you and I know the rules of evidence, and then they're lax there in traffic violations court, but they do exist to some extent. And they try to just read from their report because they just have no recollection. They do so many of these tickets that your client just doesn't stick out anymore. And then if you can get them to just testify when they thought they were going to be able to read from the report from their memory, I've seen them have a lot of problems then because they don't recall your client exactly, and that's a very furtive area then to try to catch them in a mistake and get them to acknowledge that they just don't recall your client at all, so they can't really say that it was your client that was speeding or committed the violation. And I've been lucky on that count a couple times.
One thing I always recommend to people who are representing themselves is go to the court early, don't check in right away, sit there, watch the testimony roll through, then check in, because what you're going to see is you're going to see the same police officer there for 12, 15 tickets. They have a big pile of tickets in their hand, and it's the same speech. It's the same speech over and over and over again. Listen to what they say, listen to what the defenses are. Sometimes what you'll actually see is a situation where there's actually good defenses that people are presenting, and yet the court will ignore it. But you'll get a sense of either a pattern or a problem, like there were critters on the road and people were swerving left and right just to avoid, killing raccoons or who knows what, because it was a wooded area. You'd be surprised. So a lot of people come in with very, very earnest defenses, and they're all poo-pooed by both the police and the court system. But you could learn a lot.
Absolutely.
You can learn a lot.
You learn a lot. You learn a lot about the judge. You learn a lot about the police officers. As you say, you learn what may help you, what good defenses are, what the judge likes, what he doesn't like, he or she. It's very important to watch when you're going to represent yourself.
Now, obviously, if you could afford a lawyer, and it's always good to have one. And there's certain situations where you could not afford not to have an attorney when your license is on the line.
Absolutely.
The only thing I should say to people is you don't want to go to traffic court on 2 speeding tickets and lose, and then get the 3rd ticket and say, well, this time I'm going to get a lawyer, because the problem is that you're putting too much pressure on the lawyer to have to beat a ticket when it may not be beatable, because sometimes it's just not so. So one question I have for you in that sort of realm is it a good strategy to kind of say, yeah, I was speeding, but I was only going 19 miles an hour over, as opposed to the 30 miles an hour that they've accused me of? How does that work in a trial situation?
I think that the only time that it's really a good idea to do it is to admit that you were speeding is 2 factors. One is you can tell that you're comfortable with the officer. The officer doesn't have too much of an attitude. If the officer just initially has an attitude, then you're really not going anywhere. And number 2, you weren't that far over the speed limit, and maybe he's going to cut you a break. But to say that I was 19 over when in fact you were 30 over, it's kind of disingenuous. It's going to piss off the officer. If you're going to do a full mea culpa because you were just a few miles over, as I gave the example last week's segment, I did that in a late night pullover coming back from New York City, and I knew that I was about 14 to 16 miles over, which is not that vast. And then I just acknowledged it because I had a good vibe from the officer. He didn't seem like he was going to get mad at me, and I knew I had no alcohol on my breath. So I had all the right factors going. I was able to achieve that. But no, if you're way over, trying to then claim that you weren't quite as far over as you knew you were, I think that's just disingenuous. You're either going for broke and telling the truth, or you're not. Don't start arguing and litigating your case there on the side of the road. You're never going to win that argument. You're going to piss off the officer, and they're going to use that against you anyway, because they're going to say during the trial that, hey, he even admitted he was at least 19 over. I caught him at 30 over. He just got the number wrong, but he admitted he was over.
Well,
and that's damaging.
Same question, but now we're at trial. So, in other words, let's say we followed your very sound advice and we don't say anything at the pullover, but, there's a difference between being 19 over and 31 over. Does it pay to fall on the sword at trial and say, Judge, look, I was going 19 over. I was not going 31 over. Does that work?
I have been able to do that when I thought that there was really no chance of me getting a total dismissal on it. And we have some very reasonable judges here in our local traffic violations court, and I have had that work. And I think that's kind of where they're not allowed to, as we discussed in the prior segment and even in last week's segment, they're not allowed to engage in plea negotiations in the traffic violations court. But that is a way for them to sort of cut the baby in half and give you a little bit of a break and still believe the officer and find that your client was not speeding quite as much as the officer said, but you're still being found guilty of a lesser speed. And so, yeah, that can work. But I really would suggest that you get a lawyer if you're going to do that, because I don't know that they're going to give the same break when you don't have a lawyer who's trying to massage the situation, try to send a message to the judge as to why you're doing this and how you're doing it, and trying to cut a break, and hopefully the lawyer has some prior relationship with the officer. So it really it's dicey, but I would do that in some situations.
So let's there's radar, there's laser, there's instant on, and there are airplanes, and I guess in helicopters too. What are the different things that you have to take into account as a lawyer when you're talking about the kind of device that they used, and I guess pacing, that the kind of device they used to create the summons?
Well, you want the calibration, you want the documents showing how that whatever they're using was calibrated, whether it's their own vehicle, if they were following your client, whether the radar, the laser, when were the aircraft, whatever they utilized, when were the last inspections conducted. You have to go through all the documents, and you and I know that it's very detailed and very tedious, but you have to make sure that they have all the documents and that they're done correctly and up to their own manuals and their own regulations as to how they were handled and how they were serviced over time and how they're calibrated immediately, at the most recent time immediately prior to their use on your client. And that's where, quite honestly, you can catch them with their pants down sometimes, is on the documents and devices. Same with DWI cases and all the documents that are related to the breathalyzer test that they utilized in your case. So you really want to go through, if you're going to challenge, if you're going to get a lawyer to do that, you want to go through all of the documents to make sure that they're all up to snuff and appropriately done, because there are instances where mistakes are made. They don't have the right calibration documents, or they don't bring them with them to court, and that is also a furtive area to try to catch them.
Yeah. In the world of truck regulation, I end up in the traffic violations courts a lot. And what's interesting is, I'll challenge the documents. One time they had, I don't know, it was like 6 signatures on one page and like 3 on another. And I said, this signature doesn't look at all like this one. And I'll say, you see this? I don't think this person signed the same one. I think somebody signed their name for him, because if you look, it's so different. And again, you got to really look at everything, or the
stamps, whether it's a stamp signature. I've had been able to make hay out of a stamp signature and just say, hey, obviously this is not properly authenticated under the business rule exception to the hearsay rule, because it's a stamp signature. So there's no indication that somebody that is actually representing that this is what occurred, as opposed to a secretary who stamped it on there. So there are many technicalities, but these are very finely tuned technicalities that by and large you're going to have a lawyer take a look at in order to catch these technicalities.
So when a client comes to you, what do you need from them? Do you need their driver abstract? Do you get that? Do you need the evidence?
We are able to pull a client's abstract from DMV records as long as we have the client's authorization, and I'm sure you get the same thing from the client. When they come in, before I even meet with them, I have my secretary make a copy of the documents that they brought, a copy of their driver's license, a copy of the traffic tickets that they brought, and I will have her quickly they'll sign an authorization allowing us to obtain their DMV abstract, and I will have that pulled before I even sit down in the room with the client. And the reason for that is a lot of clients don't recall their prior record. I hate to say, some of them may not always be honest with you, and their prior record is so important to the penalties that they're looking at and are associated with the offense. as you and I discussed in prior segments, you have your third speed within 18 months, or it's so many points within 18 months, and suddenly you're looking at suspension. If it's your second DWI within 5 years of when you got your license back from your prior DWI, you're not eligible for any type of a conditional license ever throughout the entire proceedings. So the client's prior record is so important to the discussion, it's almost impossible to have that discussion without your client's abstract. So I will want that. If they were wise enough to go back to the scene, and sometimes when they call in, I speak with them on the phone, I will ask them prior to our meeting to go back and take photographs of the scene. If it's a speed, take a videotape of the prior 1 mile. And that way I can make an assessment as to whether there are any technical defenses to the case. But one of the most important documents is absolutely the client's driving abstract, because the ramifications are so different if it's a first offense as compared to a third or fourth offense.
Well, the Google Earth I've used a whole bunch of times.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is actually kind of a neat little thing. We only have about a minute or two in this segment, but I'd like to start the topic, which is, could you talk about sort of some of the point systems? And let's start first with the driver responsibility assessment, because a lot of people show me these letters that they get from the state of New York, and they're appalled that they have to pay like $600 over 3 years or more, because to talk about that, if you don't mind.
Well, what happens is that New York State is continually coming up with schemes to create money and create revenue.
I like the word scheme, because that's really what it is. It's a scheme.
And whether you're talking about the driver's assessments, the accumulation of points, you're talking about speeding tickets, you're talking about surcharges that they have on every case that has a disposition when you plead guilty or are found guilty. They're figuring out ways to add, or DWI cases, they're figuring out ways to add of money that you have to pay that goes straight to the state. And as you described, these are monies that you're not able to take any kind of a deduction for off your taxes, so it's clean money coming in. And so now we have a system where if you have a certain number of points, now you have to start paying a yearly driver's assessment. If you have prior DWIs, you have to pay a yearly driver's assessment. And you then pay for any school that you have to attend, whether it's safety class or a dunk driving program. You have to pay to get your license back. There are all these schemes now that are coming up with money for the state that are going to increase the state's coffers. And one of the ones that the people who don't have the DWIs have to worry about is the driver's assessment that you're going to deal with when you have an accumulation of points or multiple DWIs within a certain period of time. Within 18 months, you have 3 speeding or moving violations. And now suddenly you're going to be paying all these yearly assessments on top of your normal insurance, on top of registering your vehicle, on top of paying your normal bi-yearly reinstatement. I think it's bi-yearly of your driver's license. And it's just a money-making scheme for the courts and for the state. What's important for that is that you never should take lightly your first or second traffic ticket, because it's all so cumulative now with the point structure that, as you described, I think, earlier in this segment, you have somebody who's already been found guilty of a speed or 2 speeds. Now they come to you with a third. You may not be able to get them out of the third one. They're going to wish that they had hired a lawyer on the first or second, because the third one is now going to zing them, and they're going to have their license suspended. They're going to have driver's assessments. And so you definitely want to take those first tickets seriously, because the cumulative effect, although we all like to think that we're never going to make the same mistake again, history has proven many people wrong on that note. You want to make sure you take those first tickets very seriously.
All right. When we come back, I want to ask the very important question of, is there a speeding situation where you could be arrested on the spot for being too excessive? Keep it right here. This is Richard Solomon with attorney Barry Covert, taking care of business, tcbradio.com, also nyctrucksummons.com too. We'll be right back. While I'm in taking care of business with my very, very special guest, Barry Covert, who's an attorney with Lipsitz Green, Chimay, Cambria, lglaw.com, 800-870-8138. If that was too fast because you were driving, didn't have a chance to write it down, just send me an email at through tcbradio.com or tcbradiowcwp@yahoo.com. I know I speak fast, but we have so much to cover. You can always give us a call at the station, and we'll get the information to you as well. And there's always someone at the station during the day answering the phone, and we answer our email, we answer faxes, we get packages, we get copies of books, we get all kinds of really cool stuff. We have lots of people out there who want to be guests and who have suggested. We've had people who've suggested some of the greatest guests we ever had, so we appreciate all of that. I'll never forget my friend Joanne, who recommended the Bronx Wanderers to come on, and they were just absolutely great. And then my friend Jeff, who recommended that we have Jeff Mattson from the Dark Star Orchestra. So for all the people out there who suggest great guests, thank you, and thank you for all the guests, including Barry Covert, for spending your valuable time, and sharing all of the important lessons that you've learned along the way and all the experiences to share with us. Is there a situation where you're driving and you're going so fast that they can just cuff you on the spot?
Absolutely. They can charge you with reckless driving if they believe that you're going so fast that you were a danger to the public based upon your speed. And I just had that situation. A client, along with a couple other individuals, were on what we lovingly call crotch rockets, and they started on the thruway in Fredonia entrance, and they apparently were going so fast that they did not even realize that they were being chased by the police, and they were going so fast that they made it up to an exit about 30 miles later, and were able to exit and go to a gas station right off the exit. And then the police finally caught up with them at the gas station while they were gassing up their crotch rockets, and they were immediately charged on the spot with reckless driving because their speed was so excessive that the officers were so angry, to be honest, that they were going so fast and zipping in and out of traffic as well that they charge them with the reckless driving. So you can have those situations.
Is there a speed number? Is it like over so many miles per hour that's an automatic trigger? Or is it more of a judgment call?
I think it's more of a blood pressure of the officer issue and how high his blood pressure goes. And I think that's really the number that they take into account is if you're just going so fast and so for great a distance, if you don't even realize that they've got bubble lights going behind you, and it turns out that usually that's also associated with driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol, but if it turns out it's not, but the officer is that aggravated that you cause that much danger to the population, which quite honestly you do at those excessive speeds, the officer is going to charge you. Now, whether it sticks or not is a whole different issue. They can always charge you because they believe that there's probable cause, but in our case, they couldn't make it stick because they just couldn't prove that there was any actual danger to the public based upon the driving of these motorcycles. But yes, the question of whether you can be arrested, absolutely. Can they prove it beyond a reasonable doubt if they're outside of the 4 large cities in New York, and then they're in town and village judge courts or city court, but not of one of the 4 largest cities? They have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, and the prosecutors in this case didn't even pretend that they could. So,
what are the other situations that could lead to a misdemeanor or felony offense involving the driving of any motor vehicle, whether it's a motorcycle or a car, or even a boat?
Obviously, there's driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and as we discussed in last week's segment, there's an uptick in driving under the influence of drugs. I've really seen that, not only in charging you for drugs that are laying about your vehicle, prescription drugs, but also operating under the influence of prescription drugs, where a client was just driving, and what the officer said was a very bad manner, and had no alcohol in their system, but admitted that they were on prescription drugs. But as you see from the billboards that they're posting lately, they are charging that as driving under the influence of drugs, even if it's a prescription drug. It does not matter if it's got codeine in it, or it's OxyContin, or some other pain medication. I have had cases now where they're just strictly charging that because that's leading to impaired driving under the influence. So you've got that. You've got reckless driving. You've got any offense that's putting the public in danger is going to be the reckless driving that they're going to charge you, and you're going to get a misdemeanor charge on that. And those are, by and large, the main misdemeanor charges. And under Kendra's law, if you're driving under the influence and you have someone, I believe it's 16 or under, while you're driving under the influence in your vehicle, by maybe, I haven't had one of those lately, but as to the exact age, then you're going to be charged immediately with a felony. And they're doing that all the time as well, that they're charging you under the felony with that. So you really have to be careful about any time you're driving with any drugs or alcohol in your system.
Are there any situations in which there is a motor vehicle collision that could lead to your arrest?
Oh, absolutely. The collisions can.
What would those be?
Well, if there's any alcohol involved or drugs involved, that can absolutely lead to your arrest on the spot. If someone is injured, it's more likely that they're going to try to seek a warrant to have a compulsory blood draw taken from you if they have any reason to believe that you are under the influence of alcohol or drugs. If someone was injured and there's reckless driving involved, but no drugs no alcohol or drugs involved, they could arrest you on the spot for reckless driving. It's a misdemeanor, and take you away for that if your driving was egregious enough to warrant that, or perhaps a combination of your driving and the injuries on the scene. As we know, these are human decisions that the officers make on the spot, and they could arrest you for that. Again, whether they can prevail and find you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt is an entirely different issue. But you could absolutely find yourself arrested. And as we discussed earlier, the sooner you call a lawyer in any of those situations, the much better off you are, especially in a traffic accident situation, because your lawyers really want to get out there quickly with their accident reconstruction specialists and document the scene before you lose the evidence. I know that Rick Weisbeck spoke previously on your show. I'm sure he talked about the importance of preserving the scene for civil lawsuits. Same thing when it comes to defending criminal cases. I want to get my investigator out there immediately that evening or the next morning to take photographs, to make measurements. And so you got to call your lawyer right away. But yeah, when there's an accident involved, you're increasing your likelihood of being arrested. They come out. A lot of times the reason that you have these people leaving the scene of an accident is because they don't have insurance. So if the officers come and now you don't have insurance, it's more likely that they're going to arrest you for it and take you in for it and let you get arraigned on those charges than if they just pulled you over and they found out that you had no insurance but there was no accident involved.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I've been to many a court for something, let's say a truck-related summons, and what you'll see first are the prisoners being processed for DWI, accidents, all kinds of stuff. Beforehand, what's interesting is you'll go into a court, let's say it's the village of Amityville or whatever, and there you are, and then they'll say, all right, everybody in the last two rows, everybody move back, and then all of a sudden they'll take several people out in their orange jumpsuits, and then you'll see them prosecuting or arraigning for some very serious things with DWI involving fatalities. I mean, if you really want to be scared out of your mind, sit in one of the courtrooms, see some of the offenses that are actually brought forward with people who are in custody, and some of them are being held without bail, or they can't raise the bail or whatever it is, or they're flight risks, or maybe they're not documented, and there's a concern that they're a risk of flight. And you'll see that. It's kind of amazing.
Absolutely, and I think that it really would help for people to do that, because I think that people would really alter their driving habits. I'm sure you've altered your driving habits over the years. I have mine, because we see the dire consequences of not only accidents, and that's obvious that you want to avoid accidents, you want to avoid drinking and driving and losing your license, but just the consequences of getting simple traffic tickets. And having accumulated points and having the potential of your driver's license suspended, or not paying your insurance and then being charged with not having had insurance, and after a certain number of days of not having insurance, your license, if you didn't have insurance for a certain number of days, your license automatically gets suspended, and you have a suspension period, and now you can't drive for your career or for your living. And so people really, I think that people really would alter their driving habits if they went to a court and they saw really the dire consequences of accidents, DWI accidents, DWI fatalities that I represent all the time, simple traffic tickets. When you see how much you have to lose and how much, as you indicated previously in a segment, how we all rely upon our licenses for our social life, but more importantly, most of us for our professional life, that you really will take that privilege, and it's a privilege and not a right, to have a driver's license. You would take it more seriously and perhaps drive more cautiously.
I totally drive so differently. In fact, I was the passenger in a car once. We were driving on the New Jersey Turnpike. The driver had a radar detector. It was kind of late. We were driving a long distance, and we must have been hit with instant on or something like that. And I just saw the lights go, the whole bit. And I said, if you were smart, get over to the right lane, pull over to the shoulder. They're coming. I am telling you, they're coming. And sure enough, he goes, you sure? I go, trust me. So we're pulled over. We're sitting there. The trooper pulls right up. The Jersey trooper pulls up right behind us. And the windows. And I said, just give the license and registration. We'll deal with this later. And he did get a ticket for speeding. There was almost no conversation said. But I knew it would have been much worse if they had to pull him over, bring him over to the side. Where you going? It was sort of like you said, just be compliant. He didn't mean anything. They didn't really ask much. I figured, look, this is New Jersey. We're from New York. We'll deal with this, differently. Let's talk about a little bit about out-of-state stuff. What is it like having out-of-state plates and being a real New York resident? What about changes of address? And what about having out-of-state licenses?
Well, those are all very complicated issues. The first thing I would advise is to try to make sure that all your paperwork is correct. Get your New York State driver's license if you moved into the state, and get it within, I believe, 30 days to get it. And if you move even within the state of New York, get the correct address. One of the problems you have if you haven't changed your driver's license is that DMV may be mailing your renewal information, court summonses to the address that they have for you as opposed to your actual address. But if you're coming in from out of state, get your New York State driver's license and get it in a timely fashion, or that could be an offense in and of itself. You want to get New York State driver's license plates because I believe that you are less likely to get pulled over for a vehicle and traffic charge within the state of New York if you have New York State plates. If you have Texas plates or Virginia plates, immediately you stick out. And as we discussed in a prior segment, you don't want to stick out when you're on the road. You want to just be under the radar screen, let them look at another vehicle that has violations or has an out-of-state license plate or has marijuana paraphernalia hanging from the rearview mirror. Don't be the one that sticks out. And when you have out-of-state plates and you're perhaps speeding just a few miles over, maybe they weren't going to pull over at that speed the New York State driver's license plate, but because you have out-of-state and you're a few miles over, they pull you over because they're a little bit interested in seeing why somebody from Texas or Virginia is driving in New York and driving a little bit over the speed limit. So you really, when you're coming in from out-of-state, get your license, get your driver's license plates switched, and you're just going to make life that much easier on yourself. And remember now that nationwide, reciprocity is not perfect, but when you get a traffic violation ticket out of state, you should take that seriously, because just pleading guilty, saying, well, I'm doing this, I'm pleading guilty in Virginia, it's not that big of a deal. I don't want to hire a lawyer down there to take care of my ticket. By and large, and again, it's not perfect, that conviction out of state is going to come back onto your New York State abstract, and that can, in the future, come back to haunt you.
Exactly. All right, we only have 3 minutes left, so let's do the lightning round. Real fast, because I want to get to you have a blog of barrycovert.com, but before that and your contact information, 1 minute, what's the story with restrictive driver's licenses?
Well, the conditional driver's licenses that you get for when you have had your license suspended, and you're entitled to once, I believe, in a 5-year period, or your conditional driver's licenses for when you get a DWI, is largely, it's only good to and from work, to and from school, to and from the driver's doctor's office, and then sometimes they get, depending on which one you get, especially on DWI, because there's 2 different forms, then one evening a week they give you 2 or 3 hours of driving for your personal business. But it really is harmful to you because you're limited in how many of those restricted licenses that you can get. And so if you have a situation come up again within 5 years, you're not going to get another license. But it really zings your insurance. Your insurance rates skyrocket. By and large, you're going to be paying what led you to get the restricted license. It's going to cause you to pay your annual assessment, that annual assessment fee we were talking about earlier. So it really is problematic.
All right, we have 2 minutes. So what's barrycovert.com all about?
Well, that's the blog that I set up a couple years ago, and I put information out there in relation to changes in the law, new laws that are pertinent. I'll put on some links to recent comments I've made to the media on certain cases or certain areas of the law, whether it's television, radio. I'll definitely put the link up to these great shows that you and I have been recording. Links to some newspaper and magazine articles. Wall Street Journal has quoted me a few times. So it's different information that I put up onto the website that I think might be of interest to the general public, and it's a way to sort of stay in touch and communicate with people.
Well, all I can say is this. You've been a wealth of information. You've been incredibly gracious with your time for the 2 weeks that you spent with us. I appreciate all the expertise you privately counsel to the clients that I recommend. And I think you do a great job, and I think you have phenomenal experience. And everyone that I recommend to you, I know they're in the best of legal hands.
Rich, it's always a pleasure to deal with you as well.
All right, 800-870-8138 is Barry's number. LGlaw.com, and his blog is barrycovert.com. That's it for us. All I can say is we talked a lot about driving. There's a lot to talk about. Maybe in the future we'll have you back to talk about updates and things like that. But in the meantime, everybody, protect your license, be careful, be safe on the roads. We'll see you all in a week, and thank you for listening as always.